All right, so we've had a couple of audio examples, but this is Max, and you can control audio, samples, synthesizers, spatialization, but you can, of course, also control video, and that can be video files, or you can use visual generators with OpenGL and bitmap stuff. So let's see what we can do with visuals. And again, this is a really kind of simple example that allows us to draw information. It's just kind of like a schematic type thing. But you can see how you can apply the contact information from the Morph and get a good sense of what's happening when you actually are touching it. The other cool thing is that this patch has some OpenGL examples too, so you can see like how to draw circles, and then you can take this and pull it apart and add your own sort of interesting things to how everything is drawn to the screen. So this can get you started with getting touches into the visual realm, as well as getting familiar with how some of the OpenGL stuff works. So let's dive in. And I have this patch open. This is called Sensel Basic Contact Drawing. So let's take a look at what this actually does. When I touch the device, we'll get a contact. And it's got labels that sort of show information about it. And in this case, the labels are actually faked. But if you were using this to visualize like an interface and you wanted to update those labels, it's not complicated to do that. I have all the infrastructure for that. And so I can put my whole hand on there and you can see how that's interpreted. And you can see sort of how I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and keep 5. And then it starts counting again, skips 5 and goes to 6. So it's a nice visualizer of like, oh, what is exactly happening with the API? So how does this work? So the label assignments I've created, this is something I could have done using just like a text file or whatever, but I wanted to break it out into a patch that would allow you to sort of, again, break into it again and actually update these things in real time. So these are just lists in order of contacts. So this converts a number to a note name. So this is why the first contact shows E2, and then the next one will be 4 steps up at G flat 2, and then a couple steps up to C, and so on. So that's, and then there's a list of parameter names. So this is the force. So you can see this makes the dictionary element force, and everything just flows into this dictionary. So it's easy to merge with the dictionary from the Morph contacts. So again, I don't want to belabor how this stuff works. Let me zoom in on here so you can see those lists a little bit better on your screen. The note numbers, like I said, it starts at E2 at 48, ends up at C3 on the third contact. Let's see, and then so this is just forming a dictionary. So if you're curious about dictionaries and how to build them, even if you're not curious about how that might work, you can understand like, oh, this is how a dictionary works. So then we have the OpenGL world. So this is just sort of a container that you can send OpenGL commands to that dictate sort of the size of the screen and how everything is rendered. And then you can, of course, change some properties using this menu here. So if I want to change the background color to something more exciting, I can do that. And there's a whole lot of parameters. You can really spend a lot of time on this. And now here's our Sensel object again, creating the 0 force, and then our sort of draw patch. So in the drawing patch, hey, there's our poly again. And this is the same contact draw patch that we saw in the previous example. Well, it's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. So instead of converting it to MIDI, it converts all of my contact information into things that I'm going to send to a OpenGL sketch object. So that draws the circles. So you can see on any given contact, there is a circle and there is a opacity to the color and a size of that circle. So the size is determined by pressure. And you can see that the scaling is not that great. I could maybe make that better so it's more dramatic. So I can have a single contact with I guess that's right, the area is what makes the size of the contact, size of the circle. And then pressure determines the opacity. And how you scale those things with these scale objects really determines like the drama of these things. So pressing really hard, I kind of cap out the opacity pretty quickly. So that requires tweaking. And again, this stuff is all sort of notated in this patch. And then here's where the text is actually handled, because that's got to be handled on each individual contact. So there's multiple GL text objects that will create the text labels. So all of that's handled within the poly. I can't have just a single universal GL text object. I'll show you where I'm pointing at here. So these are the text that write the number and the labels. I can't just have a single one. Each one has to be independent. Unlike all of the drawing commands that go to a single sketch, all of the circles are handled in a single sketch object. And that is again here in the draw. So what GL Sketch does is it draws circles and rectangles and lines and things like that. So it's basic vector drawing things. Not super exciting, but very useful for these sort of schematic things. And then in this patch, some other things you can play around with is, the font size. I think that updates in real time. Yeah, so you can change the font size. And then you can just chase where this goes by double-clicking on it and find where the receives are. And you'll see that's in the poly. Going to those text objects. And then you can also change the colors. You can see how these are sort of selected. And I just have a call that each poly pulls up. So that is just a simple drawing application. And if you're really good with OpenGL, you'll be able to really break this open and make it your own and do some pretty wild drawing stuff with it. It's also kind of a cool example of like a sort of futuristic interface. Maybe it's not that futuristic because it all is sort of like Minority Report, which was like 20 years ago or whatever. So yeah, that is basic drawing, basic contract drawing. So then from here, we'll move on to something a little bit different.